Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and I'm here for another Sunday Sew Along summer tutorial. That's kind of a nice ring to it now that we're getting towards the end of summer. Anyway, today I am going to be showing you how to do a narrow shoulder adjustment. Now I have this in videos elsewhere in my shirt dress. It's my shirt dress sew along, a butterick shirt dress sew along I did. I show how to do a narrow shoulder adjustment with a yoke, but I thought I would just put this into its own little video. So for today's video, I actually chose the Rhapsody blouse by Love Notions. I actually don't need a narrow shoulder adjustment for this pattern, but it was a good illustration because it's got a yoke that comes around to the front. So I thought I'd talk you through, what's different if you just have a regular shirt and, front and back and how you do that versus if it's just a yoke in the back and then obviously the yoke all the way to the front, which is the most complicated, I guess. It's really not complicated, but probably the most complicated of the three. So I decided to do it on the Love Notions Rhapsody just so you could see how you would do that if you come across your own pattern that has a yoke that goes from the back to the front. So that is what I am showing you today. As always, if you have any questions, please leave those down below. I will answer those as soon as possible. Also, if you enjoy this type of content, I do have a Ko-fi account, which is a link down below, which is a virtual tip jar. All that money just goes right back into the channel with, maintenance, equipment, supplies, all that kind of stuff so that I can continue bringing the educational videos such as these to you. As much as possible. All right, that is all I have for today. I will see you guys again on Tuesday. I hope you're having a good weekend and I will talk to you then. Bye. Okay, let's do a narrow shoulder adjustment. All right, so like I mentioned, I'm using the Love Notions Rhapsody blouse just because it not only has a back yoke, but the yoke piece actually wraps around to the front. So I thought this would answer all questions about narrow shoulder adjustment in one pattern. I actually do not have to do a narrow shoulder adjustment for the Rhapsody. I just thought this would be a good illustration. So I've got my paper here. I'm going to be using a marker. Again, don't use a marker when you're doing this on your own because that is going to be too thick of a line. You're going to want to use a pencil, but I want you guys to be able to see. All right, so the first thing that we are going to need to do, this yoke piece, this notch right here is actually the top of the shoulder. So we need to divide this up into, okay, hold on. I'm just going to make myself some reference lines here so that I stay on grain. Okay, so I'm just gonna make a line across, a shoulder line across here at that notch. And we're gonna cut this apart just for right now. And then this line here is gonna be my reference point when we put it back on. Okay, the other thing we're gonna wanna do is draw in our seam allowance here where it will connect. This seam allowance is 1/2 inch. So I'm doing that bottom piece and then also here at the top piece. Okay, now if this top here is the shoulder point, so a lot of tops that have yokes, this would be just the back, the shoulder point for the back. You don't have to do this part. You don't have to draw in the actual line here. And I'll kind of explain that as we move along here. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this front part of the yoke off. Okay, so that is our back shoulder point-ish. It probably would have more of a, good gracious, more of a slope, but, okay, hold on. I've already lost my reference. Okay, so this is the armhole edge on this side. So I'm going to be matching this up on the front here. Now the front gets gathered in to this yoke, but that's okay. We just need things to match at the cut line. Now a lot of people are going to ask, let me move that out of the way. A lot of people are going to ask, shouldn't you be dealing with the sewing or the seam line or the sewing line? But actually Linda Lee teaches it this way and it works really well. So we are not going to do that. All right, so what I'm doing, I'm actually going to do it that way. I'm matching up my shoulder point, and you'll notice that I've got a little bit of seam allowance sticking out there, and we're just going to kind of ignore those. Now, I know that this looks kind of funny and looks a little different than, I'm just going to put very lightly, put a piece of tape there because I want to be able to pull that off. We're just concerned about this outside cut line here on that side. And then over here, this also gets pleated in to fit the yoke. But we just care about the armhole edge. So then I can put that like so. All right. Lightly just putting tape there just so things kind of stay put. So there we go. Now I've connected my yoke with my back piece. Now, if this were, you know, a regular front and then just a back that had a yoke, you would just need to do this part where you just draw in your seam line on the top of the bottom back and also here at the bottom of the yoke and attach it like this. And then you would have your normal shoulder point up here and then your front would be fine. So again, I'm just showing this so you get a better idea of how to do this. And obviously if you're working with a top that doesn't have a yoke, this all just plays out the same way. So hopefully this all makes sense. I'm showing you the most difficult way to do this, and then you could back it up depending on what your pattern looks like. Okay, so the first thing, let's do the front first. The first thing we're gonna do is we want to trace our armhole. Now, we are going to be adjusting the positioning of the armhole, the arm's eye, but keep in mind that our sewing line is staying the same, even though we're manipulating the cut line. The sewing line stays the same, so we don't have to do any adjustments to the sleeve. So I'm just tracing the armhole, and I'm just gonna mark the top here and the side seam, just like that, okay? And you also wanna mark your notch, okay? Now let's pretend that I need a, I don't know, we'll just do 1 inch because that's something that I typically need to do on some patterns. So we're gonna come up here at the top of the shoulder, and I realize there's not a seam allowance here because I just cut the pattern apart, but even if you do have a seam allowance here, this works the same. I would just wanna make sure, you know, if you had your 5/8 or your 1/2 inch or whatever seam allowance, make sure you're going in 1 inch and that 1 inch goes, you know, it's 1 inch at the seam line, if that makes sense. But we're just gonna mark here. So that's 1 inch in from my cut line right there. And then what I'm gonna do is slide this under here, and I'm gonna match this little, make sure everything's in focus here. Mark this little, you know, I marked the top there. So I wanna match that up with this new line and match that up at the top right there. And I'm just gonna stick my finger, I just cut my fingernails today. That was unfortunate timing. And I'm just rotating this piece underneath until this piece matches up with the side seam. So see, I've raised the side seam here. And typically, that's fine. Like that is usually something that you need if you need the narrow shoulder adjustment. This is literally just tweaking it and moving things in that it's what your body needs. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to tape this part down really well. I'm just gonna do this lower part because I'm adding here, but I'm gonna be cutting away here. So now I'm gonna trace that cut line that's underneath, and I can see that through this paper. You may not be able to see that, but I'm just going to draw this up to connect that, and then I'm just following underneath right there. So I've taken off my 1 inch. So now I can pull off that yoke piece, and I can go ahead and pull off that yoke piece, and I'm just going to cut along that line to shave off that. And I'm just going to set this to the side because this will get attached back on to the back here in just a second. And then for here, we're just going to follow along like so. Now, obviously, this front yoke piece would still need to be gathered into the back, or into this front piece would still need to get gathered into the yoke. You're just going to have more. Alternatively, you could just leave. Well, no, I would go ahead and do it this way it would be easier. Okay. Never mind. I'm making things more complicated for myself. Okay. So there's our front piece. So I'm going to set this aside. So now on our back, we want to do the same thing. We are going to first draw our seam line. Oh, I'd also, wait, hold on. Before we get to that, I'd also like to point out here on the front, your notch moves. And my notch, remember I drew in the notch, it is right there. So my notch moved a little bit because that got readjusted. Okay, sorry. All right, now I'm going to be tracing in my back. And I'm going to do, there's my double notches, okay? So now we're going to measure in 1 inch from the top here. Now, usually the back is not as curved as the front. So I'm going to show you how we'll true that up here in just a second. Okay, so again, I'm going to mark that line right up to that spot. And I'm just going to move that. So see, we've not raised the side seam as much here. So we will deal with that in just a second. And that's typically, that is not unheard of. Just want to tape the bottom piece because I want the yoke to come off. Okay, so trying to see through here to find my notches. My notches didn't change much here. But there is my new line there. Oh, for heaven's sake, I can't get the lid back on my pen here. So now we'll just cut this away. There. We're going to set that aside. We'll put our yoke back together here in a second. And then on this piece, okay, we'll do that. Okay, so obviously now we have quite a discrepancy here for truing up our lines. If I'm matching up my waist dart here, I've got quite a bit. And my recommendation is just to split the difference. So we have a difference here of 1/2 of an inch. So I'm just going to subtract 1/4 of an inch from the front side seam, and this will not really affect your sleeve at all. Take it to nothing, and then we can add 1/4 of an inch to the back. And then we'll just add and this is just because that curve in the back is a little less steep. It's not as curvy. I did not tape that in well, did I? All the tape. All right, and then we'll just go to nothing here. And now those should match. And tape down all this paper in the back just so it's not flopping around. So now when we put our back and front on top of each other, if I match my waist notches, those are right on. Okay, so now we have that done, and then we can just come over here, matching our notch. You know, we made that reference line there, and tape that back on. Trim away your tape. And there you go. That's your new yoke piece, your back that has a raised underarm, and your front that has a raised lower underarm. And that is how you do a narrow shoulder adjustment the easy way. So I hope that's helpful. This is the way I do all of my narrow shoulder adjustments. It always works like a dream. So I hope that was helpful. As always, leave me any questions you have down below, and I'll answer those as soon as possible. Have a good one.